Hey everyone, welcome back to our chapter book read-along of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. We are reading this super cool illustrated copy, illustrated by John Rocco, and we are now on chapter 7. So, as you are getting this started, if you're watching this with anyone, take a moment, pause the video, talk about some things that we have read so far, maybe some favorite characters, monsters, or fun things like that. Maybe a little event that has happened so far, things that are happening in our book. And then comes my review. Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, is where we meet our main character, Percy Jackson. He is a young boy who has kind of a rough day of it, doesn't he? He starts off in this story with his friend Grover at Yancey Academy. There's Mr. Grover. At Yancey Academy, and they go on a field trip to the Museum of Art in New York City. Now, they also have a teacher there named Mr. Brunner and another teacher named Mrs. Dodds. Percy Jackson gets in trouble on this field trip. Mrs. Dodds takes him back into the museum, but something strange happens. Mrs. Dodds turns into a terrifying monster. She grows talons, she sprouts wings, her eyes glow. And right as Percy thinks it's the end, Mr. Brunner tosses him a pen that turns into a sword, and he slashes through her, and she turns to dust. The odd thing about it is no one remembers Mrs. Dodds afterwards. Not a single person. Though Grover is looking a little suspicious every time Percy mentions Mrs. Dodds. Well, another thing happens before they leave school. Percy overhears Grover and Mr. Brunner talking about some worries they have. They think Percy is in danger, and something coming up, a summer solstice deadline, is very concerning. Percy and Grover go back to New York City in a bus, and they meet 3 ladies that are knitting the biggest socks Percy has ever seen. They make eye contact with Percy and snip the cord. Grover is terrified, and so Percy ditches him. Then we meet Percy's mom, Sally Jackson. She is a super nice, wonderful person and caring and loves her son very much. Her husband, Percy's stepfather, is not a very nice guy. His name is Gabe Ugliano, and Percy calls him Smelly Gabe because he stinks, inside and out. He is not a nice person, and he actually smells. Well, Percy and his mother go on a little trip, celebrating him coming back from school, and they go to the beach. When they are there, a storm hits. And in the middle of the storm, Grover comes to the door, knocking on it and worried because something is after Percy. Grover, Percy's mom, and Percy speed down the highway to Camp Half-Blood. They are so close to the camp, and when they're almost there, their car gets struck by lightning. Then a very scary monster attacks. This monster is called the Minotaur. He is half bull, half man. Look at that scary thing. Ooh, ugly. And he grabs Percy's mom and squeezes, and she turns into a gold light and disappears. Percy fights the Minotaur and breaks off his horn and gets him with it. And then the Minotaur turns to dust. Percy and Grover go back over the line and end up at Camp Half-Blood. One more thing about our friend Grover. He's not actually human. His bottom half is a goat. He's what they call a satyr. And he is half goat, half man. When Percy wakes up at Camp Half-Blood, he meets some other people. Annabeth, who I have a picture of, Miss Annabeth, is another camper there, about Percy's age. And then the camp director, who they call Mr. D, and is also the Greek god Dionysus. What He's a Greek god of wine, very good at also growing strawberries. And the last person that Percy sees is his teacher, Mr. Brunner. But Mr. Brunner was just his pretend name. His real name is Kirian, and he is a centaur, which means he has the top half of a human and a horse. So Percy gets to know camp a little bit better. He walks around with Annabeth and Kirian and learns some things, like how in his world, Greek gods really exist. And they really mess with people. And monsters exist, and half-bloods exist. So, Percy sees all of the cabins and the beautiful Camp Half-Blood, and is walking around, meets the guys from Cabin 11. Their cabin is the Hermes cabin, and he meets Luke, who is also there. He also meets a pretty grumpy, rough girl named Clarice, and she tries to put him in his place and show him who's in charge at camp. Well, as she's trying to shove Percy's face literally into a toilet, Percy shoots the water at Clarice and her friends, soaking them and knocking them out the door. Well, we don't know who Percy's godly parent is yet, but I think we will figure that out soon. All right. So, we are now up to our next chapter. I hope you enjoy the next part of our book, Percy Jackson, the Lightning Thief. Chapter 7. My dinner goes up in smoke. Word of the bathroom incident spread immediately. Wherever I went, campers pointed at me and murmured something about toilet water. Or maybe they were just staring at Annabeth, who was still pretty much dripping wet. She showed me a few more places: the metal shop, where kids were forging their own swords, the arts and crafts room, where satyrs were sandblasting a giant marble statue of a goat man, and the climbing wall, which actually consisted of two facing walls that shook violently, dropped boulders, sprayed lava, and clashed together if you didn't get to the top fast enough. Finally, we returned to the canoeing lake, where the trail led back to the cabins. "I've got some training to do," Annabeth said flatly. "Dinner's at 7:30. Just follow your cabin to the mess hall." "Annabeth, I'm sorry about the toilets." "Whatever." "It wasn't my fault." She looked at me skeptically, and I realized that it was my fault. I'd made water shoot out of the bathroom fixtures. I didn't understand how, but the toilets had responded to me. I had become one with the plumbing. "You need to talk to the Oracle," Annabeth said. "Who?" "Not who, what. The Oracle. I'll ask Kirian." I stared at the lake, wishing somebody would give me a straight answer for once. I wasn't expecting anybody to be looking back at me from the bottom, so my heart skipped a beat when I noticed two teenage girls sitting cross-legged at the base of the pier, about 20 feet below. They wore blue jeans and shimmering green t-shirts, and their brown hair floated loose around their shoulders as minnows darted in and out. They smiled and waved as if I were a long-lost friend. I didn't know what else to do. I waved back. "Don't encourage them," Annabeth warned. "Naiads are terrible flirts." "Naiads?" I repeated, feeling completely overwhelmed. "That's it. I want to go home now." Annabeth frowned. "Don't you get it, Percy? You are home. This is the only safe place on Earth for kids like us." "You mean crazy kids?" "I mean not human. Not totally human anyway. Half human." "Half human and half what?" "I think you know." I didn't want to admit it, but I was afraid I did. I felt a tingling in my limbs, a sensation I sometimes felt when my mom talked about my dad. "God," I said. "Half God." Annabeth nodded. "Your father isn't dead, Percy. He's one of the Olympians." It's crazy." "Is it? What's the most common thing gods did in the old stories? They ran around falling in love with humans and having kids with them. Do you think they've changed their habits in the last few millennia?" "But those are just..." I almost said myths again. Then I remembered Kirian's warning about 2,000 years I might be considered a myth. "But if all the kids here are half gods..." "Demigods," Annabeth said. That's the official term, or half-bloods. Then who's your dad? Her hands tightened around the pier railing. I got the feeling I had just trespassed into a sensitive subject. My dad is a professor at West Point, she said. I haven't seen him since I was very small. He teaches American history. He's human? What? You assume it has to be a male god who finds a human female attractive? How sexist is that? Who's your mom, then? Cabin 6. Meaning? Annabeth straightened. Athena, goddess of wisdom and battle. Okay, I thought. Why not? And my dad? Undetermined, Annabeth said. Like I told you before, nobody knows. Except my mother, she knew. Maybe not, Percy. Gods don't always reveal their identities. My dad would have. He loved her. Annabeth gave me a cautious look. She didn't want to burst my bubble. Annabeth gave me a cautious look. She didn't want to burst my bubble. Maybe you're right. Maybe he'll send a sign. That's the only way to know for sure. Your father has to send you a sign claiming you as his son. Sometimes it happens. You mean sometimes it doesn't? Annabeth ran her palm along the rail. The gods are busy. They have lots of kids and they don't always... Well, sometimes they don't care about us, Percy. They ignore us. I thought about some of the kids I'd seen in the Hermes cabin. Teenagers who looked sullen and depressed, as if they were waiting for a call that would never come. I'd known kids like that at Yancey Academy, shuffled off to boarding school by rich parents who didn't have the time to deal with them. But gods should behave better. So I'm stuck here, I said. That's it? For the rest of my life? It depends, Annabeth said. Some campers only stay for the summer. If you're a child of Aphrodite or Demeter, you're probably not a real powerful force. The monsters might ignore you, so you can get by with a few months of summer training and live in the mortal worlds the rest of your year. But some of us, it's too dangerous to leave. We're year-rounders. In the mortal world, we attract monsters. They sense us. They come to challenge us. Most of the time, they'll ignore us until we're old enough to cause trouble, about 10 or 11 years old. But after that, most demigods either make their way here or they get killed off. A few manage to survive in the outside world and become famous. Believe me, if I told you the names, you'd know them. Some don't even realize they're demigods, but very, very few are like that. So monsters can't get in here? Annabeth shook her head. Not unless they're intentionally stalked in the woods or specifically summoned by somebody on the inside. Why would anyone want to summon a monster? Practice fights, practical jokes. Practical jokes? The point is, the borders are sealed to keep mortals and monsters out. From the outside, mortals look into the valley and see nothing unusual, just a strawberry farm. So you're a year-rounder? Annabeth nodded. From under the collar of her t-shirt, she pulled a leather necklace with 5 clay beads of different colors. It was just like Luke's, except Annabeth's also had a big gold ring strung on it, like a college ring. I've been here since I was 7, she said. Every August, on the last day of summer session, you get a bead for surviving another year. I've been here longer than most of the counselors, and they're all in college. So why did you come so young? She twisted the ring on her necklace. None of your business. Oh. I stood there for a minute in uncomfortable silence. So I could just walk out of here right now if I wanted to? It would be suicide, but you could, with Mr. D's or Kirian's permission. But they wouldn't give you permission until the end of the summer session unless you're granted a quest. But that hardly ever happens. The last time... Her voice trailed off. I could tell from her tone the last time hadn't gone well. Back in the sick room, I said, when you were feeding me that stuff, ambrosia. Yeah, you asked me something about the summer solstice. Annabeth's shoulders tensed. So you do know something? Well, no. Back in my old school, I overheard Grover and Kirian talking about it. Grover mentioned the summer solstice. He said something like we didn't have much time because of the deadline. What did that mean? She clenched her fists. I wish I knew. Kyrian and the satyrs, they know, but they won't tell me. Something is wrong in Olympus. Something pretty major. Last time I was there, everything seemed so normal. You've been to Olympus? Some of us year-rounders, Luke and Clarice and I and a few others, we took a field trip during winter solstice. That's when the gods have their big annual council. But how do you get there? The Long Island Railroad, of course. You get off at Penn Station, Empire State Building, special elevator to the 600th floor. She looked at me like she was sure I must know this already. You are a New Yorker, right? Oh, sure. As far as I knew, there were only 102 floors to the Empire State Building, but I decided not to point that out. Right after we visited, Annabeth continued, the weather got weird, as if the gods had started fighting. A couple of times since, I've overheard the satyrs talking. The best I can figure out is something important was stolen. And if it isn't returned by summer solstice, there's going to be trouble. When you came, I was hoping... Athena can get along with just about anybody, except for Ares. And of course, she's got a rivalry with Poseidon. But, aside from that, I thought we could work together. I thought you might know something. I shook my head. I wish I could help her, but I felt too hungry and tired and mentally overloaded to ask any more questions. I've got to get a quest, Annabeth muttered to herself. I'm not too young, and if they would just tell me the problem... I could smell barbecue smoke coming from somewhere nearby. Annabeth must have heard my stomach growl. She told me to go on. She'd catch me later. I left her on the pier, tracing her finger across the rail as if she was drawing a battle plan. Back in cabin 11, everybody was talking and horsing around, waiting for dinner. For the first time, I noticed that a lot of the campers had similar features. Sharp noses, upturned eyebrows, mischievous smiles. They were the kind of kids that teachers would peg as troublemakers. Thankfully, nobody paid much attention to me as I walked over to my spot on the floor and plopped down with my minotaur horn. The counselor, Luke, came over. He had the Hermes family resemblance too. It was marred by that scar on his right cheek, but the smile was intact. Found you a sleeping bag, he said. And here, I stole you some toiletries from the camp store. I couldn't tell if he was kidding about the stealing part. I said, thanks. No prob. Luke sat next to me, pushed his back against the wall. Tough first day? I don't belong here, I said. I don't even believe in the gods. Yeah, he said. That's how we all started. Once you start believing in them, it does not get any easier. The bitterness in his voice surprised me, because Luke seemed like a pretty easygoing guy. He looked like he could handle just about anything. So your dad is Hermes? I said. He pulled a switchblade out of his back pocket, and for a second I thought he was going to gut me, but he just scraped the mud off the sole of his sandal. Yeah, Hermes. The wing-footed messenger guy? That's him. Messengers, medicine, travelers, merchants, thieves. Anybody who uses the roads. That's why you're here, enjoying Cabin 11's hospitality. Hermes isn't picky about who he sponsors. I figured Luke didn't mean to call me a nobody. He just had a lot on his mind. You ever meet your dad? I asked. Once. I waited, thinking that if he wanted to tell me, he'd tell me. Apparently, he didn't. I wondered if the story had something to do with how he got that scar. Luke looked up and managed to smile. Don't worry about it, Percy. Campers here, they're mostly good people. After all, we're all extended family, right? We take care of each other. He seemed to understand how lost I felt, and I was grateful for that, because an older guy like him, even if he was a counselor, should have steered clear of an uncool middle schooler like me. But Luke had welcomed me into the cabin. He'd even stole me some toiletries, which was the nicest thing anybody had done for me all day. I decided to ask him my last big question, the one that had been bothering me all afternoon. Clarice from Ares was joking about me being big 3 material. Then Annabeth, twice, she said I might have been the one. She said I should talk to the Oracle? What was that all about? Luke folded his knife. I hate prophecies. What do you mean? His face twisted around its scar. Let's just say that I messed things up for everybody else. The last 2 years, ever since my trip to the Garden of Hesperides went sour, Kyrian hasn't allowed any more quests. Annabeth's been dying to get out into the world. She pestered Kyrian so much, he finally told her he already knew her fate. He'd had a prophecy from the Oracle. He wouldn't tell her the whole thing, but he said Annabeth wasn't destined to go on a quest yet. She had to wait until somebody special came to camp. Somebody special? Don't worry about it, kid, Luke said. Annabeth wants to think that every new camper who comes through here is an omen she's been waiting for. Now, come on, it's dinner time. The moment he said it, a horn blew in the distance. Somehow, I knew it was a conch shell, even though I'd never heard it before. Luke yelled, 11, fall in! The whole cabin, about 20 of us, filed into the commons yard. We lined up in order of seniority, so, of course, I was dead last. Campers came from the other cabins, too, except for the last 3 empty cabins at the end, and the cabin 8, which looked normal in the daytime, but now was starting to glow silver as the sun went down. We marched up the hill to the mess hall pavilion. Satyrs joined us from the meadow. Naiads emerged from the canoeing lake. A few other girls came out of the woods. And when I say out of the woods, I mean straight out of the woods. I saw one girl, about 9 or 10 years old, melt from the side of a maple tree and come skipping up the hill. In all, there were maybe 100 campers, a few dozen satyrs, and a dozen assorted wood nymphs and naiads. At the pavilion, torches blazed around the marble columns. A central fire burned in a bronze brazier the size of a bathtub. Each cabin had its own table, covered in a white cloth trimmed in purple. 4 of the tables were empty, but cabin 11's was way overcrowded. I had to squeeze under the edge of the bench with half my butt hanging off. I saw Grover sitting at a table 12 with Mr. D, a few satyrs, and a couple of plump blonde boys who looked just like Mr. D. Kyrian stood to one side, the picnic table being way too small for a centaur. Annabeth sat at table 6 with a bunch of serious-looking athletic kids, all with gray eyes and honey blonde hair. Clarice sat behind me at the Aries table. She'd apparently gotten over being hosed down because she was laughing and belching right alongside her friends. Finally, Kyrian pounded his hoof against the marble floor of the pavilion and everyone fell silent. He raised a glass. To the gods! Everyone else raised their glasses. To the gods! Wood nymphs came forward with platters of food. Grapes, apples, strawberries, cheese, fresh bread, and yes, barbecue. My glass was empty, but Luke said, Speak into it. Whatever you want. Non-alcoholic, of course. I said, Cherry Coke? The glass filled with sparkling caramel liquid. Then I had an idea. Blue cherry Coke. The soda turned a violet shade of cobalt. Let's do that again. The soda turned a violent shade of cobalt. I took a cautious sip. Perfect. I drank toast to my mother. She's not gone, I told myself. Not permanently, anyway. She's in the underworld. And if that's a real place, then someday... Here you go, Percy, Luke said, handing me a platter of smoked brisket. I loaded my plate and was about to take a big bite when I noticed everybody getting up, carrying their plates toward the fire in the center of the pavilion. I wondered if they were going for dessert or something. Come on, Luke told me. As I got closer, I saw that everyone was taking a portion of their meal and dropping it into the fire. The ripest strawberry, the juiciest slice of beef, the warmest, most buttery roll. Luke murmured in my ear, Burnt offerings for the gods. They like the smell. You're kidding, I said. His look warned me not to take it lightly, but I couldn't help wondering why an immortal, all-powerful being would like the smell of burning food. Luke approached the fire, bowed his head, and tossed in a cluster of fat red grapes. Hermes, he said. I was next. I wished I knew what God's name to say. Finally, I made a silent plea. Whoever you are, tell me, please." I scraped a big slice of brisket into the flames. When I caught a whiff of the smoke, I didn't gag. It smelled nothing like burning food. It smelled of hot chocolate and fresh-baked brownies, hamburgers on the grill and wildflowers, and 100 other good things that shouldn't have gone together, but it did. I could almost believe the gods could live off that smoke. When everybody had returned to their seats and finished eating their meals, Kirian pounded his hoof again for attention. Mr. D got up with a huge sigh. "Yes, I suppose we'd better say hello to all you brats. Well, hello. Our activities director, Kirian, says the next capture of the flag is Friday. Cabin 5 presently holds the laurels." A bunch of ugly, cheering rose from the Aries table. "Personally," Mr. D continued, "I couldn't care less, but congratulations. Also, I should tell you that we have a new camper today, Peter Johnson." Kirian murmured something. Percy Jackson," Mr. D corrected. "That's right. Hurrah and all that. Now run along to your silly campfire. Go on." Everybody cheered. We all headed down toward the amphitheater, where Apollo's cabin led a sing-along. We sang camp songs about the gods and ate s'mores and joked around. The funny thing was, I didn't feel that anyone was staring at me anymore. I felt that I was home. Later that evening, when the sparks from the campfire were curling into the starry sky, the lunch horn blew again, and we all filed back to our cabins. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I collapsed on my borrowed sleeping bag. My fingers curled around the Minotaur's horn. I thought about my mom, but I had good thoughts. Her smile, the bedtime stories she would read me when I was a kid, the way she would tell me not to let the bedbugs bite. When I closed my eyes, I fell asleep instantly. That was my first day at Camp Half-Blood. I wish I'd known how briefly I would get to enjoy my new home. Well, that was Chapter 7, My Dinner Goes Up in Smoke. I hope you have enjoyed that, and now it is time to discuss. So, who are Annabeth's parents? Show you the picture. Miss Annabeth. Who are her parents? First, her father is a mortal. He's a regular guy. He is a teacher at West Point. Her mother is Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy. What does it mean to be undetermined? So they're talking about their Greek parents, their Greek godparent. And they keep telling Percy he's undetermined. What does undetermined mean? It means that their parent hasn't claimed them yet. So they were talking about how there's a lot of guys and girls just hanging out in the Hermes cabin because no one has claimed them. So they just live in there. Why are some kids at the camp year-rounders? So they don't just stay at the camp in the summer. Some of them stay all year round. Why did Annabeth say they did that? Well, some of them give off even more of, they called it an aura. So it's like almost a beacon, like a spotlight. Have you ever seen a spotlight go across a night sky? It's like, hey, I'm over here, to the monsters. Not good. So some of the kids, Camp Half-Blood is one of the only safe places for them to be. What do you think? Would you rather stay there all year round or just come in the summer and go home? Me, personally, I don't know. I think I'd probably just want to be a summer kid. Also, then it means that you could go out to places that you like and not get attacked by monsters. So I think I'd just want to be there in the summer. What do the beads mean on Annabeth's necklace? She was talking about that. It is one bead for every year she has been to Camp Half-Blood. So they have a special bead for every year. She's been there since she was 7 years old. Whew. Why does Luke feel bitter? So bitter is kind of upset and almost sour towards something. So maybe I don't personally like some types of foods because one time it made me sick. So I feel bitter toward that food. Why do you think Luke feels bitter? Well, he was talking about how he didn't think the gods cared about them and things like they forgot about their kids who were just down there hanging out in this one cabin, all crowded together. And so it made him a little upset and bitter, meaning he just doesn't really like the gods or thinking about them. Why do you think Percy asked for a blue cherry Coke at dinner? Have you ever seen cherry Coke that's blue? No. Why do you think he picked that blue? Well, they talked about how his mom always made blue food. Her and Smelly Gabe had an argument about how there was never any blue food. So she specifically made blue food for all the time. So it made Percy feel a little bit better to be drinking a blue drink. What does Percy wish for as he scrapes his food into the fire? He wishes for a sign. Something from the gods to tell him who he is. Who is his godly parent? And lastly, why do you think Percy felt a little different after the bonfire? I think it was because he finally felt welcomed. It's kids just like him. Yeah, he's not going to get along with all of them, but he felt welcomed and at home, finally. One last reminder, all of these things, like the Greek gods and the monsters and some of the other characters, like Riordan, are based on Greek myths. So a reminder that Greek myths are stories that were made up a long, long time ago by the ancient Greeks to explain some things like science and how the world works. So a lot of these Greek gods were in charge of something specific. So Ares was the god of war, Poseidon was the god of the sea, and he also made earthquakes. Pretty cool. So we hope you have enjoyed this really awesome chapter of our story, and we will see you back here with our next chapter of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief. Bye, everyone!